I've been spending a lot of this week remembering a science experiment that we did in elementary school. I can't remember if I was in the second grade or the third grade, but I remember the experiment very well. We were all given these little paper cups, these little Dixie cups. Do you remember those? And we were each given soil to put in the cup and then a seed to plant in the soil. And we were all taught how to give it water regularly and how to place it in the sunshine. And then we were all told to take these plants in our little paper cups home and observe them while they grew. Continue watering them, continue putting them in the sunshine, and watch what happens over time. Watch how the leaves poke through the soil. Write down all your observations about how the color's changing, the size, the shape. It was a wonderful lesson. Obviously very impactful. I still remember it 30 years later. It was a great way of imparting information, knowledge about how seeds work, where plants come from, how everything grows. But I also remember something else about that experiment, something that I don't think was at all intended. I remember how each of us would come to class every single day and debate constantly, argue throughout the whole day about who was growing the best kind of plant at home. See, I grew up in the dry desert of southeast Arizona, and I spent my entire childhood watching people on TV and movies go through apple orchards and just pick apples off of trees and eat them, and it looked so delicious and cool. And I so longed to have an apple tree. So I was convinced that I was growing an apple tree in this little cup. And that once it got big enough, I could take it out of the cup and plant it in my parents' backyard, and I would have my very own apple tree to enjoy. But other kids were convinced they were growing something better than an apple tree. There were some kids who were convinced they were growing orange trees or peach trees. One little girl was convinced she was growing her, I quote, her grandmother's grapefruit tree in this cup. Somehow she was growing the exact same tree in that cup. One of my favorite memories is this kid TJ. He was convinced that one day his cup would just explode and he would see a giant watermelon that had been growing under the soil, and he could just dive in and eat that watermelon. And no matter what our teacher did, no matter how hard she tried to convince us, we would not believe her that we were all growing the exact same plants at home. I don't even think they were seeds. I think they were like bean sprouts. I think we all planted beans. And yet we were convinced that they were going to be something greater and bigger and better than all the other plants in the class. It's easy to teach knowledge. It's easy to teach facts and figures. With enough repetition, the human brain learns these things very, very well. But there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. My teacher had no problem imparting on us the knowledge of how plants grow, but there was nothing she could do to give us the wisdom to know that all these plants had way more in common than not, to know that we were growing all the same plants at home, that it was a waste of breath to talk about who was growing something better, because they were all the same. This is how we see wisdom at work in Scripture. Our story today from 1 Kings, it's the story of Solomon, King David, his son. King David was the greatest king that Israel ever had, and his young son took over the throne. And Solomon went before God and said, God, I'm too young to lead. I don't know if I'm coming or going. How am I supposed to provide justice for this countless multitude that you are calling me to be in charge of? And God said to Solomon, because you have asked for this, because you have asked for a listening heart that can discern good and evil, to provide justice for all your people. You didn't ask for wealth, you didn't ask for power, you didn't ask me to smite your enemies, you asked what is good for everyone. Because that is your question, your request, I grant it to you. God gave Solomon the wisdom he needed to lead. And that wisdom teaching began with this sentence: there is no one like you who has ever come before you, and there is no one like you who will ever come after you. Solomon had the wisdom to know that that teaching applied to each and every one of the people in his care. Every single one of them was God's unique and unrepeatable child. So the only way of providing justice for all of them, Solomon discerned, he learned over time, the only way to provide justice is to focus on what we have in common. Only by holding a common space can we allow all God's unique and unrepeatable people to live in love and peace and justice together. This is a teaching we need for this moment. We are several months into this pandemic that is only, by most measures, getting worse in almost every place in the nation except for Maine. We have increasing knowledge every day about this virus and about its effects. We know what it can do to our bodies. We know how it's spread. We know how to combat it. We know that some of the safest things we can do is stay home anytime we can. And if we have to go out, please wear a mask and wash your hands with soap and water. There's many things we know about this virus. But what we are so far lacking in our common discourse about this pandemic is wisdom. We are looking for the things that will keep us safe on all kinds of different plants. We're all trying to grow these individual solutions to staying safe. We've been taught to think that it's up to us on our own to have enough money or enough resources or enough political power to remain safe during this time. So we're all having to make our own decisions. When do I go shopping? When do I get help shopping? When do I take the risk of getting together with friends and family? When do I try to live a normal life, a life I'm familiar with? And what parts of my normal life do I have to do without for the foreseeable future? The questions are all about us as individuals. Look at the conversation around whether or not to reopen schools. There's a lot of different feelings, a lot of different opinions. There's clear pluses and minuses to reopening schools and having our kids go back to school in the fall as they normally would. And there's huge pluses and minuses on keeping them home where they are more safe and their teachers are safe. And it's way more inconvenient and way more of a stress on families, but at least everyone is staying healthy. You know, 1 out of every 6 working Americans right now is out of work, is not receiving a paycheck. And unless our federal government acts quickly, there are as many as 20 million Americans who might be evicted from their homes this week, as early as this weekend. 20 million people evicted. I have a hard time even wrapping my head around how big a number that is. So I have to think of it as, imagine if every single person in Maine was evicted from their homes all at the same time. Now imagine 15 Maines. That's 20 million people. It's 15 people residing in the state of Maine. Sorry, people residing in 15 Maines, all getting kicked out of their homes all at the same time. We cannot have an effective conversation around what is safe unless we are willing to draw from deep wisdom. The wisdom that has us take all of our individual knowledge, all of our individual experiences, all the lives and stories of each and every one of God's unique and unrepeatable people, and find what we have in common. Creating common space where we can practice justice together. Dr. Cornel West has said, justice is what love looks like in public. If you're able to view someone in public being loved, adored, honored as God's beloved, unique, unrepeatable person, you are seeing justice at work. Friends, I don't know about you, But to me, it does not seem just to send our kids back to school and our teachers back to school and our staff back to school, putting all of them at risk just because we can't come up with a better idea. It does not seem just to me that I should have the good fortune to be in a house that I don't pay for, and I'm welcome to stay for as long as I'm employed. Meanwhile, 20 million other people are at risk of losing their homes now, today. It should not be the case that I have all that I need to stay safe for myself, and millions upon millions of others are living in such unsafety. So we're going to need to draw from some deep wisdom to figure out a way forward. So we are holding common spaces that truly afford every single one of God's unique and unrepeatable people to be safe and free, to live the lives that God has called us to live. What might that look like? How would we choose to restructure ourselves, to reorganize our community, if we were deeply committed to making sure that every single person among us is safe to be the unique and unrepeatable person God has made them to be? I think this is why Jesus offers us parables. Parables of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Small seeds, as small as a mustard seed, growing into a tree that provides shelter and homes for all creation. It may be, in our reading today of Matthew, it may be the last sentence that Jesus offers that gives us the most clear understanding of what the kingdom of heaven might look like. Jesus says it's like a master who brings out the old and the new of his treasure. The parables and the visions of the kingdom of heaven are perplexing, specifically because it sounds like a society, like a structure of the world that we've never seen, that no one's ever seen us try on a mass scale. It seems very new, so new that we can't even imagine what it looks like. But at the same time, in Matthew, Jesus says, I am simply revealing what has been laid since the foundation of the universe. It's not only a new way of living, it's an incredibly ancient and old, maybe the original way God intended for us to live together. If we are interested in living safely, it's time that we start holding common space. Common space where all of God's unique and unrepeatable people can live together, loving one another as they love themselves. The deepest wisdom we have is to love yourself as God loves you, and to find ways of expressing that same love to others. Let us be wise in the coming days and weeks, friends. Let's provide for ourselves by providing for others, commonly, together.